Lieutenant Emily Carter's boots crunched softly on the red, dust-choked soil of Forax, a planet where every alien faction in the galaxy had once tried and failed to conquer. She looked out at the swirling storm of debris and battle-damaged buildings in the distance. On a map, Forax was a black mark, an empty place where only the foolhardy or the desperate ventured. Its history was written in blood, an endless war zone where entire civilizations had clashed, and where any living creature, human or alien, had only one choice: survive. Emily, however, felt no fear as the ship's ramp lowered behind her. She had been on worse worlds. Her calmness wasn't born of ignorance. It was the product of over a decade spent in the hellish trenches of countless battlefronts, where a soldier learned to embrace the chaos or be consumed by it. There was no time for doubt here. The dropship's engines roared as they lifted off, disappearing into the dust and smoke. Alone now, Emily straightened her back, adjusting her helmet. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning metal and ionized atmosphere. Alien ships streaked overhead, flashing with laser fire, while roving bands of warriors fought over what little remained of a once thriving city. But none of this fazed her. Her mission was clear: retrieve intelligence about an unknown alien weapon that could shift the balance of power in the war. If she didn't act, humanity could face a new nightmare, one that could wipe out entire colonies. Emily switched on her comms, her voice a calm whisper against the backdrop of distant explosions. "This is Lieutenant Carter. I'm moving out." No response came. The drop zone was silent now, except for the hum of her equipment. As she advanced through the ruins, her senses sharpened, noting every detail. She had to. Here, the line between life and death was razor thin. Movement ahead caught her eye, a flicker of something moving fast. A Krith soldier. The alien was camouflaged by psychic manipulation, but Emily could still hear its faint breathing. She allowed the soldier to pass, watching, waiting. There was no rush. In this place, rushing could get you killed. She slipped into a half-buried building and found cover beneath its crumbling arches. The sound of battle intensified around her, but she was steady. Her heart rate didn't rise. Her body didn't tense. It was as though she had become part of the landscape itself, blending into the chaos with ease. It wasn't that she had no fear. It was that she knew how to push it aside. The universe had a way of keeping you on edge, but Emily had mastered the art of controlling her emotions. In a world where every alien species had a weapon designed to destroy, her greatest weapon was the ability to remain calm in the face of death. She had no time to waste on panic. Suddenly, the ground trembled. The earth beneath her feet seemed to groan in protest as a massive explosion lit the sky. The building crumbled in the distance, and the screams of both soldiers and civilians echoed through the war-torn streets. Emily's eyes narrowed. She wasn't alone anymore. Time to move. She took a deep breath, adjusted her rifle, and stepped forward, her every movement deliberate and controlled. The war zone was a living, breathing entity, and she was ready to meet it head-on. Across the war-torn plains of Forax, rumors of the lone human soldier began to spread like wildfire. The alien leaders, each powerful in their own right, could feel the ripple of unease ripple through their forces. The very presence of a human, one soldier, no less, had thrown the delicate balance of the battlefield into disarray. They had heard stories, of course. The old legends. Humanity was considered an afterthought in the grand scheme of galactic conflict, a species with limited reach and technology compared to the ancient civilizations that dominated the stars. But now, they were learning something they had never expected. The human spirit was a force of nature that none of them could fully comprehend. The Krith, a species with formidable psychic powers, were the first to take notice. These aliens were renowned for their ability to manipulate time and space, bending reality to their will. But when the Krith sent a psychic scout to probe Emily's mind, they encountered something they had never experienced before. Their mental probes, which could disarm the strongest of minds, slipped off her thoughts like water on stone. They couldn't reach her. She was calm, impenetrable, and utterly indifferent to their attempts to control her. The leader of the Kurith, a towering figure named Zalfar, gathered his council. His glowing red eyes flickered with apprehension as he relayed the strange anomaly. The human, Zalfar's voice was soft, but filled with a chill that spread through the room, is unaffected. No fear, no uncertainty. She is a creature of pure focus. Zalfar's second-in-command, Arixel, tilted his head. Is she some form of psychic shield, or is it something else? Zalfar's gaze darkened. We will study her. If this human can resist the touch of our minds, it is something we cannot ignore. Perhaps there is more to humanity than we realized. Elsewhere, the Gorith, brutal, gargantuan creatures that resembled walking tanks, began to take an interest as well. Known for their raw physical power, the Gorith were not easily intimidated. But the idea of one human walking through a battlefield, unshaken and undeterred, disturbed them deeply. The Gorith had seen nothing that could stand against their might, but they knew that a single human could become a rallying point for other species, and that was an idea they could not tolerate. Captain Jaruk, leader of the Gorith warbands, snarled in his heavily armored helmet as reports of the humans' exploits came in. One soldier cannot stand against the Gorith, he muttered to himself. But something about Emily's silence, her refusal to break under the weight of their power, unnerved him. The humans have always been underestimated, his advisor, a grizzled veteran named Torgrak, said. Maybe this one is not like the others. A third faction, the Solkan, had yet to make any official comment, but their actions spoke volumes. Known for their perfect stealth and silent assassinations, the Solkan were the galaxy's deadliest shadow operatives. They had no tolerance for anything that disrupted their ability to hunt from the darkness. But they could not help but notice how Emily, despite the danger of the war zone, moved with an uncanny calm. The Solkan didn't understand her, and that was something they couldn't accept. I've never seen anything like her, whispered Karis, the Solkan leader, to his inner circle. She's human, yet she acts like a predator, like us. We must eliminate her before she becomes something more. But the most unsettling thing for all of them was this. Despite their combined efforts to understand the human, none of them could figure her out. Every species they had encountered had a predictable set of reactions, motivations, and weaknesses. But Emily? She was a complete unknown, an anomaly that broke every rule they thought they understood about life in the galaxy. And so, across Forax, as the war raged on, and the galaxy's deadliest predators debated the presence of this lone human, one thing was clear. The legend of the human who could sleep calmly in the center of the deadliest battlefield had begun to spread, and with it, a quiet terror grew. The day had hardly begun when Emily found herself in the heart of a brutal conflict. The explosions were deafening, the ground trembling with each shockwave as massive alien warships blazed across the sky, their weapons lighting up the horizon. The Gorith and Krith were at it again, fighting for control over a critical supply route in the northern sector. To any other soldier, it would have been a nightmare, but to Emily Carter, it was just another mission. She crouched behind the wreckage of a fallen Krith battle walker, her eyes scanning the carnage unfolding before her. Bodies, both alien and human, were scattered across the battlefield, some still writhing in agony, others long dead. The air stank of burning plasma, flesh, and ozone. In the distance, she could hear the guttural roars of Gorith soldiers as they barreled through the smoke, weapons raised. Yet, despite the madness, Emily moved with a calculated calm. Her heart rate was steady, her focus sharp. She adjusted the scope on her rifle, using the broken pieces of debris for cover. The Gorith were charging towards a group of Krith soldiers entrenched behind a pile of collapsed buildings. It was a classic move, brutal, overwhelming force designed to break the enemy's will. But Emily had already predicted it. She knew the Gorith would charge, just as the Krith would attempt to trap them in the open. She didn't hesitate. With practiced precision, she fired, her shots striking Gorith soldiers in their vulnerable joints. The massive creatures fell one by one, their thunderous footsteps halting as they crumpled to the ground. The Krith saw what was happening. One of their commanders, a telepathic general named Zathor, attempted to rally his troops with a psychic wave, urging them to focus on the human who was interfering with their plans. But Emily was already on the move. She darted from cover to cover, staying out of sight while picking off any Krith soldiers who strayed too far from their positions. With each kill, she felt a surge of adrenaline, but it didn't make her hands shake. She remained composed, every movement calculated, like a machine designed for this very purpose. The Krith general sent a powerful mental pulse, attempting to flood Emily's mind with overwhelming images of fear and despair. But Emily had fought worse than this. She had faced entire armies, seen friends die in front of her, and survived environments far more hostile than this war zone. The Krith's telepathy hit her mind, but it didn't control her. It was a whisper, a suggestion, like a gust of wind against a brick wall. With a thought, Emily shut it out. She fired another shot, taking down a Krith sniper who had been waiting for her to make a mistake. The alien's body crumpled to the ground without a sound. And then, in a moment of eerie calm, Emily paused. She knelt down, her rifle still trained on the battlefield, but her mind focused elsewhere. For the briefest second, it felt as if time had stopped. The explosions, the screams, the fire, everything became background noise. It was just her and the mission. She could hear the enemy, could feel their movements, and she anticipated their next steps. The Krith, realizing their forces were thinning, attempted to regroup. But Emily wasn't giving them a chance. She silently made her way through the chaos, effortlessly slipping through the crossfire like a shadow. And then, as if she'd never been there at all, Emily was gone. She disappeared into the smoke, blending into the war zone, as though she was just another part of it, unseen, unaffected, and utterly undisturbed by the chaos around her. But the aliens weren't done. They knew now, this human was no mere soldier. She was something else entirely. And they had only just begun to realize how dangerous she truly was. As Emily disappeared into the smoke-filled ruins of Forax, the alien factions began to stir, and a sense of unease spread through the ranks of the Gorith, the Krith, and the Tsolkhan. None of them had anticipated this. The human soldier, who had emerged seemingly from nowhere, was now the subject of whispered conversations, cautious observations, and strategic reassessments. Her very presence was becoming a problem they couldn't ignore. Zalfar, the Krith High Commander, was the first to convene a meeting of his top officers. His dark, unblinking eyes scanned the holographic map projected above the war table. The swirling chaos of battle marked the positions of his forces, but his mind was far from the tactical maneuvers. Instead, he focused on a single, irksome fact: the human. Her ability to remain untouched by his psychic intrusions was an anomaly that threatened the foundation of Krith tactics. "We have underestimated them," Zalfar said, his voice like the crackling of distant thunder. His telekinetic power swirled around him, sending tiny debris floating through the air. "No human should be able to stand against our abilities. Yet she does. I have sent my most powerful telepath to subdue her, and still she resists. This is not merely a soldier we are dealing with." One of his officers, a young Krith with jet-black scales, spoke up. "But how? How can she block us? The humans are not." "Not like us," Zalfar interrupted sharply. "Yes, I know. But they are not helpless either. The rumors of their resistance are true. Somehow, the human mind is shielded. We must discover how, before she becomes a larger threat." Elsewhere, Jarek, leader of the Gorith, had come to a similar conclusion. The massive alien had watched the reports from his command center, his fingers drumming restlessly on the arm of his battle chair. The Gorith had never been one for subtlety or patience, yet something about Emily's continued survival on the battlefield bothered him. He was used to facing enemies who cowered in fear, who faltered in the face of overwhelming force. But this human, she never showed fear. "She's not afraid," Jarruk muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Not like the others. It's as if she doesn't care. And that makes her dangerous." His second in command, Torgarak, a hulking, scared warrior, stood by his side. "She has not run from us, Captain. No other species, no species, has ever done that. She's fought without hesitation and killed without mercy. We will deal with her in due time," Jarruk replied, eyes narrowing. "But we must first assess whether this is a human trait or if it is her alone. We have sent many to engage her, and still, she survives." Meanwhile, the Solkan, the galaxy's most efficient assassins, had begun their own covert investigation into Emily's activities. Their leader, Karis, a cunning insectoid known for his patience and precision, had observed the human from afar, waiting for the right moment to strike. "It's not about her fighting ability," Karis murmured to his closest advisors, watching the human through surveillance screens. "It's her unpredictability. I've seen many warriors, many species, and they all act according to their instincts. But she moves like she knows what we are thinking. It's unsettling." His lieutenant, a young Solkan named Scar, hissed in agreement. "She's not just surviving. She's disrupting the balance. If she can do this alone, she may turn the tide of the war." Karis' mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "We cannot let that happen. We will shadow her. We will wait. When the time comes, we will strike." Across the war zone, the three alien factions were watching, calculating, and adjusting their strategies. But none of them could deny it any longer. Emily Carter, the lone human soldier, had become the greatest unknown variable in the battle for Forax. And the universe was about to learn just how dangerous a human could be when their mind, heart, and soul were pushed to the limits. Emily crouched silently among the ruins, watching the horizon as another barrage of explosions rattled the ground beneath her. The war was relentless, the chaos ever-present. Yet despite it all, she remained perfectly still, absorbing every detail with unshakable focus. Her rifle lay at her side, the barrel cool in her gloved hands, but it was her mind that was most active, not her weapon. A soft chime echoed in her earpiece and she glanced at the readout. A new transmission. She tapped her comms, activating the message. "Lieutenant Carter, this is Commander Cole. We've got word that the Krith have begun organizing a large offensive. They're pushing toward the eastern sector, likely trying to secure the last of the energy mines. This could be their attempt to draw you out. Be careful." Emily nodded, her expression unchanged. The message was routine, a reminder of the mission. But she wasn't worried. The Krith and their strategies didn't concern her. Not directly, anyway. They had their plans, and she had hers. "Understood, Commander. I'll be ready." She clicked off the transmission and stood up, adjusting her pack. Her boots crunched softly on the fractured ground as she moved toward the eastern sector, where the Krith were expected to make their move. The mine complex they sought to control was critical to the war effort, but Emily wasn't just focused on the energy stores. She was hunting something else, something far more dangerous than any weapon the aliens had unleashed. The weapon the aliens had been after for months, the one humanity had yet to fully comprehend. Intelligence suggested it could change everything. But to Emily, it wasn't just about the weapon. It was about the message it sent. Humanity was no longer weak, no longer irrelevant. They were here to stay. As she walked through the ravaged landscape, the full scale of the war around her hit home. Alien ships drifted overhead, their dark silhouettes cutting through the smoky haze like predators in the sky. On the ground, sporadic firefights broke out as various factions clashed over territory. But it wasn't the immediate battles that concerned her. It was the larger storm on the horizon, the one that had already begun to form in the minds of the alien warlords. They were coming for her. The realization sent a wave of recognition through her chest, but not fear. Emily had known it would come to this, as she had cut through Karith and Gorath soldiers with surgical precision, as she had silently taken down entire platoons without making a sound. She knew the time would come when the aliens would unite, when they would turn their full attention on the one human who refused to bow. They didn't understand her, and they couldn't. Humanity wasn't like the other species they had faced, quick to panic, easy to break, or predictable. Humans adapted. They fought with everything they had, and most importantly, they endured. And Emily, she was their symbol, the embodiment of humanity's resolve. As she neared the mines, Emily slowed her pace, keeping her movements deliberate and measured. Her rifle was now in her hands, fingers lightly resting on the trigger. Her sharp eyes scanned the periphery for any sign of movement. The ground was unnervingly still. Then she heard it, the unmistakable thrum of approaching alien forces. The Krith were closing in, but she knew it wasn't just a squad. It was the beginning of something larger, something far more coordinated. The air seemed to thicken, tension hanging heavy between the ruins, but Emily didn't flinch. Instead, she crouched low, blending into the shadows, and waited. It was time to end this. The storm was coming, but Emily was ready. It was always the calm before the storm, and in this chaos, the one thing the universe had underestimated was her ability to stand firm. The Krith forces were moving in, and Emily's pulse remained steady, her mind laser-focused. She crouched in the shadows, her eyes scanning the area where the Krith had begun to assemble, their eerie, shimmering forms emerging from the smoke. Their numbers were large, their presence intimidating. But Emily had seen worse. They were just another enemy to outwit, another challenge to overcome. The eastern sector had once been a sprawling industrial complex, filled with advanced mining equipment and power stations. Now it was a blasted landscape of shattered buildings and twisted metal, all of it serving as the perfect cover for a soldier like her. She had studied the terrain for days, memorized every nook and cranny, every likely position where an enemy might hide. Her hands moved with the precision of someone who had fought in too many wars. Her rifle was a natural extension of her body, her finger never far from the trigger. The Krith were relentless, and they had proven themselves a formidable force in the past, but their arrogance was their greatest flaw. They underestimated humanity, and that mistake would cost them dearly. Ahead, the first wave of Krith soldiers rounded the corner of a demolished building, their eyes scanning the ruins, their weapons poised. They were well-trained, used to hunting in pairs, their psychic abilities heightening their senses. They should have sensed her, but they didn't. Emily waited, her breath steady. The Krith soldiers were close now, barely 20 feet away. They were scanning the area, oblivious to her presence, convinced they were alone in the sector. But Emily knew better. She could hear the soft hum of their communication devices, the muted buzz of their psychic link. They weren't prepared for her, and they never would be. She raised her rifle, aimed with practiced precision, and squeezed the trigger. The first shot rang out, piercing the Krith soldier's skull with a sickening crack. The body dropped without a sound, crumpling to the ground in a heap of black armor. The others froze, disoriented, as the realization that something was wrong set in. Their psychic link flared in alarm, but it was too late. Before they could react, Emily was already on the move. She darted from cover to cover, her footsteps silent against the charred ground. The Krith fired blindly into the smoke, their weapons lighting up the darkened landscape in staccato bursts. But they couldn't hit her. She was a ghost in the war zone, slipping between their lines with ease, each movement a calculated step toward their destruction. The second shot took out another Krith soldier, this time striking a vital joint in their armor, severing the alien's connection to its weapon systems. The soldier crumpled, a silent casualty of Emily's precision. With ruthless efficiency, she moved on, closing in on the heart of the Krith formation. It wasn't long before the Krith realized they were facing more than just a soldier. They were facing a force of nature. The remaining Krith commanders scrambled to adjust their strategy, sending out telepathic orders to regroup. But it was too late. The tide had already begun to turn. From her vantage point, Emily saw the chaos she had wrought. The Krith were panicked now, their once coordinated assault unraveling as she picked them off one by one. Their psychic powers were no match for her calculated calm. They couldn't anticipate her movements. They couldn't read her mind. Emily had become their nightmare. As she took down the last of the Krith soldiers in her immediate area, her comms crackled to life. It was Commander Cole's voice, urgent. "Lieutenant Carter, we've detected a large enemy formation heading toward your position. It's not just the Krith anymore. The Gorith are inbound." Emily's lips curled into a grim smile. The Gorith. The ones who thought brute force could solve everything. She was ready. "Bring them on," Emily replied, her voice unwavering. "I'm just getting started." The ground shook as Emily moved swiftly to take up a new position. The Krith had been routed, but as Commander Cole had warned, it was far from over. The Gorith were coming, and this time the odds were stacked against her. Emily didn't flinch. She had seen the Gorith in action before. Massive, terrifying beasts with thick armor and brute strength that could level entire squads in seconds. Yet, in her mind, they were no different from any other enemy. They just needed to be outsmarted. The wind howled through the shattered buildings, carrying the distant sounds of marching feet, heavy, rhythmic, and unrelenting. Emily adjusted the strap of her rifle, her movements calm and precise. From her vantage point, she could see the approaching Gorith warbands in the distance, their massive forms cutting through the haze like a nightmare. The earth seemed to tremble beneath their weight as they moved, their bodies adorned with crude but effective armor. There were at least 50 of them, a massive horde, all roaring and bellowing as they advanced. It was a charge, pure and simple, and if Emily had any doubt about their intent, the deafening sound of their war cries made it clear. They wanted nothing less than to crush her under their heels. Emily's lips curled into a faint smile, her heart pounding in anticipation. She had dealt with odds like this before. The key to surviving was not strength, but strategy. The Gorith were predictable, too predictable. She knew exactly how they would move, how they would react, and that's where her advantage lay. She darted to the next building, using the wreckage for cover. Her eyes locked on the terrain ahead, calculating each move, each angle. The Gorith didn't know it yet, but they had already walked into her trap. The first wave of Gorith soldiers came into view, their hulking bodies crashing through the debris. Emily didn't hesitate. She squeezed the trigger, sending a high-velocity round into the lead Gorith's chest. The shot rang out with a satisfying crack, and the creature dropped with a thud. The others howled in fury, their enormous claws and weapons raised, but it was too late. Emily was already gone, blending into the shadows. She moved with the quiet efficiency of a predator, picking off the Gorith one by one. Her shots were precise, aimed at weak points in their armor, joints, necks, exposed sections of flesh, and each time one of the massive warriors fell, the rest grew more frenzied, more disorganized. They weren't used to being hunted. They were used to being the hunters. But Emily had flipped that script. Now, they were the ones running into the storm. The Gorith tried to regroup, rallying behind their leader, Captain Jarruk, but even he couldn't keep them from faltering. Emily watched as the Gorith's famed resilience began to break down. They turned on each other, snarling in confusion, their coordination falling apart under the pressure of her unseen attacks. She fired again, striking another Gorith warrior in the head. The massive creature crumpled to the ground in a heap of armor and rage. The others paused, their minds reeling from the invisible assault. As she moved again, Emily heard the unmistakable roar of Captain Jarruk himself, the Gorith war leader, his massive form easily distinguishable by the intricate, jagged armor he wore, bellowed orders, rallying what remained of his forces. But Emily was already anticipating his next move. He was trying to force his way through the smoke, pushing toward the buildings she had strategically placed as her cover. He wanted to flush her out, but she was not going to make that mistake. Emily moved to a different position, her mind calculating the next phase of the attack. She dropped low to the ground, her pulse steady, her every muscle trained for this moment. The Gorith were charging toward her again, their enormous bodies lumbering forward with the deadly force of a stampede. But Emily, ever calm, was prepared. She would meet them head-on, not with brute force, but with tactics, precision, and the unshakable resolve of a human soldier who had nothing left to lose. And the Gorith, no matter how large or powerful, would learn one painful truth. Humanity could never be underestimated again. The tide had turned, and this time, it would be Emily who decided how the war ended. The Gorith were closing in, their massive forms charging with terrifying speed. The ground shook with each thunderous step they took, their roars reverberating through the rubble-strewn streets of Forax. Captain Jarok led the charge, his hulking body adorned with jagged, menacing armor, his eyes burning with fury. He could feel his soldiers rallying behind him. But deep down, he knew something had changed. This human, this one soldier, was different. She had been nothing short of a ghost on the battlefield, striking from the shadows, taking down his best warriors with cold, calculated precision. His pride was wounded, but it was more than that. It was something deeper, something primal. This human had made a fool of him and his forces. Yet Jarok was not one to retreat. He would crush her beneath the weight of his army. He would show her and every other species that the Gorith were the apex predators of the galaxy. Emily watched from her vantage point, her rifle raised, eyes locked on the charging Gorith. They had no idea what was about to hit them. She could see them now, so large, so aggressive, so sure of their strength. But Emily knew that strength alone wouldn't save them. They had failed to learn the most important lesson of war. It wasn't about brute force. It was about control, patience, and adaptability. The Gorith had their fury, but Emily had precision. She squeezed the trigger, the rifle kicking softly in her hands as another Gorith soldier dropped to the ground, a clean shot to the chest. But Emily didn't stop. She moved again, disappearing into the smoke, repositioning herself faster than they could react. Another shot rang out, then another. The Gorith fell, their charge faltering, their cohesion shattered. Captain Jarok bellowed in rage, his voice echoing across the battlefield. "Find her. She cannot hide forever." His words fueled the remaining Gorith soldiers, but even their sheer size and power couldn't counter the damage Emily had already inflicted. The Gorith were losing their advantage, overwhelmed by confusion and the relentless assault from an unseen force. Jarok's eyes burned with rage as he scanned the battlefield, but then he saw something that made his blood run cold. The human wasn't just picking them off one by one. She was leading them into a trap. Behind him, at the edge of the broken city, a massive explosion rocked the earth. Emily had set the final piece of her plan into motion, a hidden cache of explosives she planted earlier. The blast sent shockwaves through the Gorith ranks, throwing several soldiers to the ground and throwing Jarok off balance. In that moment, Emily struck. She closed in on the Gorith leader, her movements swift and silent. She didn't need to be fancy or showy. She simply needed to end this. Jarok turned, his great axe raised, but Emily was faster. She dove, rolling beneath his swing, and in one smooth motion, she planted a charge on his exposed side. Before the Gorith warlord could react, she detonated the explosive. The blast sent him staggering backward, his thick armor groaning under the pressure. The explosion shattered his grip on his weapon. He roared in fury, his eyes wide with shock and pain. But Emily was already gone, moving through the chaos with ruthless precision. Her rifle was at the ready, and as the Gorith warlord recovered, she didn't hesitate. A single shot rang out, striking Jarok in the exposed weak point beneath his helmet. He crumpled to the ground, the once feared warlord of the Gorith reduced to nothing more than a pile of burning flesh and steel. The remaining Gorath soldiers, now leaderless and broken, faltered. The fear began to set in. Emily watched as their morale collapsed, and within moments, the once unstoppable Gorath force turned into a disorganized mess of panic and retreat. She had taken down their greatest warrior and shattered their resolve. But Emily didn't stop. She moved again, her focus unshaken. The war was far from over, but this battle was won. From her comms, she heard Commander Cole's voice. "Lieutenant Carter, we're seeing it. The Krith are pulling back. The Gorath are in full retreat." Emily stood, looking over the battlefield. Smoke billowed into the sky, the ruins of Forax now a testament to her resolve. She wiped the sweat from her brow, but there was no triumph in her expression. There was only the cold, quiet satisfaction of a job well done. Humanity had sent a message today. The galaxy had learned the cost of underestimating them. And Emily Carter, she was just getting started.